Okay, leases. How many of you have rented property, have rented an apartment? So most of you have been a tenant at one point in time or another. Did you really take the time to read the lease?
No. Yes.
Did somebody, as a manager of the apartment, take the time to sit down with you and explain it to you?
No. No.
Okay, so when we have rental agents, this is one of the things we teach our rental agents to do, is sometimes we'll have tenants initial every single page of the lease. It shows we went through the lease with them. They understand what the rules and regulations are. They know when rent's paid, where it's paid, how it's paid, all that good kind of stuff is part of that lease. In commercial real estate, it's a little bit different. There's not the same kind of landlord-tenant protection as there is in residential real estate. In residential real estate, we have a lot of landlord-tenant laws that make the landlord behave and make them treat their tenants with some respect and take care of a property, and they don't come back on a tenant if the tenant's complaining about it. The tenant is protected. So there's this, the landlord has much of an overbearing effect, and with landlord-tenant laws, we're trying to stop some of that. So anyone that has interest in rental property should be aware of the basic provisions of leases and management agreements and other landlord-tenant issues. How many of you here would like to be investors where you have tenants? And that's why a lot of you are taking the class. So the other thing I'm going to tell you, if you're going to be a landlord in Hamilton County and Cincinnati, go to eviction court at least once before you have to evict somebody. Go see what eviction court is all about. Go learn how to serve the eviction, how to give a default notice, how to, when you've given the default notice and then you've given a 3-day notice, to not accept cash. A lot of times as landlords, we give a 3-day notice and then we accept payments. The first thing that's going to happen is we're going to go to court. The judge is going to ask us if we've accepted any payments since we give a 3-day notice. And we're going to say, sure, we tried to help the tenant get caught up. And the judge is going to throw your case out. So you're going to start all over again. What? If you pay a property manager, they're supposed to know how to do this, yes. But a lot of people, when they first start investing in real estate, they don't pay a property manager. You have a 2-family or 4-family, you manage it on your own. You're learning by the school of hard knocks because you don't know that you can pay somebody to do this. And you look at the cost of paying a property manager and you think, why should I pay a property manager? I can do this work myself.
What's like the rule of thumb percentage of property management?
They'll get 2% of gross collected income on a commercial property. They'll get more on a residential property. So how much money do you want to give up every month to let somebody do management for you? If it's a large enough community, so many units, it's very easy to hire a property manager. But when it's a 1 or 2 unit, usually you're doing it yourself.
The one I'm working with for a 5 unit is charging 10%. Is that fair?
Because again, the overall nut of what it is and the time that they have to put in to manage the property and do the work, that's a reasonable fee. Yeah. 10% of a 5 unit would be a reasonable fee in our market. But where is the 5 unit building at? Okay, so it's in Addiston out west. It's not a college town where there's more issues with dealing with student tenants and all the fun you get with dealing with that. In Addiston, it'll be more families or people that are living there. Addiston's far enough out, they don't have, there's a turnover, but it's not a huge turnover like every year with college.
I've never met any of the tenants, but I think they're all been there for a while.
Which can be the case. And then another thing you want to look at is do you want to do Section 8 housing?
I had a friend do Section 8 and said it was too hard to keep up with all the different regulations and literally handrails being a certain amount of inches.
If they exist, yeah. But the Section 8 part of it's there is to protect the residents, to make sure that there's some standard being done to the unit. Section 8 tenants don't move a lot. They don't have a lot of money to move. And the money's pretty much guaranteed because part of their payment is coming from the government every month. And again, it is a lot of work to keep up with it and do it. But once you get Section 8 tenants, they tend to stay for a long period of time. It's just a matter of renewing the lease and doing the paperwork with the government to get the money. The other thing is real estate professionals have to be knowledgeable about local rental market to better assist prospective buyers or investors to manage their own portfolios. So if you're going to be working with people that are buying or selling investment property, this is something you want to learn a little bit about. Again, it's a niche part of the market. If you're going to work with people that are going to be buying houses, single-family houses for investment, know what they rent for in the area. Help them understand the market. Get more aware of this stuff. It is a lucrative part of the business. It can be very good for you as a realtor. A lot of people don't want to mess with this, but you can learn a lot with it. The leases. We're going to talk about essential elements of a lease. Leasehold interest. What's a lease? It's a contract. There's contract requirements that are part of it. Terms of lease. The various types of leases and the means by which lease can be terminated. So, when we lease real estate, we have something called a leasehold interest. Leasehold interest, anybody tells the world, hey, I've got a leasehold interest. I've been told by the landlord I can live here month to month. I can live here week to week. I can live here year to year. Those are the leasehold interests that we have, and they're called different things. We can have a estate for years. We can have a estate from period to period. We have an estate at will. At will means everybody agrees and the landlord accepts your money and you're staying there all the time and you just keep renewing your lease based on continuous payment. Estate at sufferance is against somebody's will. You're staying there against the will of the landlord typically. This might be where you're paying rent into the courts because the landlord isn't doing what they should do to be maintaining the property. You're getting the courts to help you get it done. What you need to know about leases for a real estate exam, I don't think you need to understand the whole difference between the estate for years versus a period to period. Understand that leases exist. Typically in our market, it's a 30-day period to get out of the lease. Either landlord or tenant gives 30-day notice at the end of a lease on a month-to-month holdover. But if you sign a lease for a year, you're obligated for a year's worth of lease commitments. If you're a landlord and a tenant signs a lease for a year, tenant skips out after 3 months, are you going to go after him for 9 months of lease? You might. It might be worth your money to go after it. But the other thing is the judge is going to come back to you and ask you what you've done to mitigate your damages. What have you done as a landlord to try to get a replacement tenant? That's what mitigating your damages are. Don't assume that because the tenant signed a year's lease, you're guaranteed that money. Even in the business world. Okay, a couple months ago, H.H. Gregg came forward and said, we're filing bankruptcy. They closed the doors. They gave the people their notice 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks notice they were closing down. As a landlord, we already are out 3 or 4 months rent. Well, probably, they had a lease that extended until 2020. We'll never get all of our rent money. That's the gamble we take. But I've already found a tenant to come in and take over the space. Is the tenant as good as H.H. Gregg? They're a better tenant, but they're not paying quite as much. But they're going to sign a 10-year lease. Overall, is it worth more money to us? Yes. So that's a risk we take. But Rue 21, clothing store. We found out they were filing bankruptcy. They went through and closed a lot of stores down. They didn't close the store at the shopping center I managed, but they didn't pay rent for 2 months. They came out of their bankruptcy. We now have the full rent payment. We're caught up. That's part of coming out of bankruptcy is getting things caught up. So there's this risk we take. Commercially, we can go back after people a little easier than you can residentially. Residentially, from a landlord's perspective, what's worth your time? That's where the big hang-up is. What's worth your time? How much time do you have to miss to take off of work for you to go to court, to pay an attorney to do things? Those are always the things that are going to be going through your mind as you're dealing with your tenant issues. Okay, so we have leasehold estates, the estate for years, period to period, the estate at will, and estate of sufferance. They all fall under this leasehold estate umbrella. That's the important part. You know it's a leasehold estate. Lease agreements. It has to be in writing if it's a year or longer in Ohio. Your tenants have to, and people that are doing this lease, capacity to contract. In other words, of age, of sound mind, not drunk, on drugs, capacity to contract. There's a legal objective. They are doing something. It's not an illegal use. Okay, so rental for an hour, we might consider that an illegal use. But renting for a month, renting for a year, a residence, that's a legal objective, legal use. Offer and acceptance is the same kind of thing. An offer to lease, the acceptance is getting a contract done. Consideration is the money. $1 another valuable consideration, $10 other valuable consideration. You'll see as comments in renewals where we don't really collect money, but consideration is part of that. Again, it's a contract. It's a business lease. The different types of leases. Everything you typically do in the residential world is what we consider a gross lease. Now, the tenant may have to pay for their own utilities. The tenant is usually paying for their rental. What do you call it? rental insurance, renter's insurance. And one of the things I want you to do too, if you're a landlord, make sure the tenants give you proof of renter's insurance before you let them move in. Because you don't want their apartment to burn up, them to lose everything, and then they're stuck with nothing. At least, okay, as a landlord, you're not responsible for their personal possessions. But if they have renter's insurance, you can have a peace of mind that you know that they'll get some money for the loss. As a landlord, you're taking care of fixing your building. Their problem is not your problem. Your problem is your building. But if they have renter's insurance, you made a policy when they move in to keep renter's insurance, you have a peace of mind that they're being taken care of. In commercial leases, we require not only renter's insurance, we require the landlords be named additionally insured for liability purposes. So we go a step further. Okay, so gross lease is typically what we see in residential. The landlord pays all the real estate taxes, pays the upkeep for the property, the tenant pays the rent every month. They may pay for their own utilities. A net lease is when the tenant pays a base rent, but the tenant may also pay for maintenance and repairs, pays for taxes, pays for insurance, things like that. And that's commercial. Percentage leases, what we do in retail, only I'm not seeing that many percentage leases. We're not negotiating as many of them as we used to. Percentage lease means if the tenant hits a break point or even point of sales that we pre-negotiated, if they go over and above that month, that base that their sales, we get a percentage over and above their sales. We used to see percentage leases a lot in malls, in shopping centers, because we said if the tenant made more than the break even, it was part of what the landlord was doing to merchandise the mall, to get more people to come in the door. Therefore, the landlord is doing promotions, should be paid for their efforts. So percentage rent is what the landlords would get. A variable lease, we can see that even in residential, but more often than not, it's a stepped-up lease. Rent increases by another 50 cents every square foot every year. That's what we call a variable lease. A ground lease, typically found in industrial and also Wendy's, McDonald's, Walgreens. They do ground leases. They lease the ground, they build the building, they pay all the taxes, insurance, and maintenance for the building, but they pay a landlord rent for the ground every single month. Ground leases, when you have a Walgreens, it's what we consider a AAA tenant. As an investor, you don't make as much money. You might make 5% return on your money, but guess what? It's still better than a savings account, and it's carefree. You know Walgreens is going to pay their rent every single month. You know you're going to be able to count on that check. Oil and gas leases, I used to deal with some of this stuff in the trust department, and we don't see them as much in southwestern Ohio, but you'll see oil and gas leases for the gas in the eastern part of the state where we're fracking. There's gas leases. Oil leases we'll see in Texas and other places, Alaska, where there's oil to be gotten. And what they do is, again, they're putting a rig on the property. They're going underground to get what they want. That property's divided. It's that sandwich where we're taking layers out, and they've got access to get to the property, to get to their equipment, but the surface can be used for other uses. Surface can be farm, can be residential, can be a lot of other uses, no matter what's going on underground. The lease purchase, this is where people are leasing with an option to purchase. In Hamilton County, you have to be careful how you do this lease option to purchase. Because if you give them too much of their option money toward the purchase, you're not really doing a lease purchase, you're doing a land contract. So you have to understand the regulations about how much is considered the right amount, a maximum amount that you can give them credit for as a lease to purchase. Lease to purchase, the idea is somebody will live there 2 or 3 years. They have enough money given to them that they now have a down payment that they can buy the house they're literally living in, or the down payment to, if you're a developer, you own an apartment community. You want somebody to live in your community for 2 or 3 years, and you want them to buy one of your houses, you give them rental credits for living in your apartment community to come buy one of your houses. So lease purchase can be Savoy, Streets of Savoy, which is behind Streets of Westchester, and Hills Community owns and develops it. Hills Community is a residential developer. They'll give people a couple months rent if they've lived in the apartment for a couple years and go into one of their homes, rent credit toward buying a home. And these are brand new homes, brand new apartment community, but they do this. Developers, builders understand this is a way to keep people, they're already in the door, they already know them and their product. Sale leaseback, this is very common with commercial. I sold building down in Lexington, Kentucky. Ohio Casualty kept 1/3 of the building. We only needed 1/3 of the building, 3-story office building. We needed 1/3 of the building. We sold the building to a publishing company, Force Magazine. We leased back the top floor. They occupied the first and second floor. So we did what's called a sale lease back. We sold the building. We leased back for 5 years. That helps them grow into the building. It helps them make a mortgage payment while we were staying in 1/3 of it. Helps them operate the building because they're getting rent payments from us. So sale leaseback is an attractive way for a corporation to sell an office building, for instance, if they're not using all of it. They're only using part of it. So it's an attractive way to do a deal and get it done. Discharge of a lease. We have breach of lease. It can be an actual eviction, or it can be something called constructive eviction. We have pro-tenant legislation, like I said, landlord-tenant laws, so the tenants don't get abused by landlords for complaining about what should be done. We have fair housing and civil rights laws. This is another thing. Housing opportunities made equal. If you work in an apartment community and you're doing lots of rental, they would much rather come and teach you how to rent it right than have to come investigate you. So housing opportunities made equal will come to real estate offices to teach you fair housing. They'll come to rental offices to teach you fair housing. They'd much rather be proactive teaching you the right thing than having to be reactive and send somebody in to investigate what you're doing wrong. Actual eviction is the actual check written. Constructive eviction would be, like I said, where we are placing our rent into the courts because the landlord isn't doing what they should be doing. Yes. It's an escrow with the Hamilton County courts, but it's constructive eviction. In essence, it's kind of the reverse eviction. If the landlord doesn't do what they're supposed to do, the tenant isn't getting booted for non-payment, but the tenant is putting the landlord on notice that the unit is inhabitable for some reason or another. So the tenant, basically, the tenant may never pay rent. The escrow money may never get turned over to the landlord. The escrow money can be given back to the tenant to help them move on, go somewhere else if the landlord hasn't done their work. And that is it for leases. It's not real hard. There are just, again, leasing is part of the real estate world that you're going to get in. Oh, security deposits. Again, we charge typically in Hamilton County, in this part of the world, 1 month's rent is security deposit. It's not the best practice. Security deposit should be actually what damages are. If the apartment rents for $1,200 a month, and your damages are usually $600 to $700 a month, make your security deposit $600 or $700. By having the security deposit the same, equal to 1 month's rent, you're inviting your tenants to walk out and never pay the last month's rent. You're inviting them never to pay you for damages if they damage the unit. So it should not be actually 1 month's rent. We just do this as an old practice. What? Because you've owned the units long enough. You know what the tenant damages typically are. Use the average number. Also in Hamilton County, in Ohio, you have to give security deposits back to tenants within 30 days. So you need to make sure you get a forwarding address for the tenant. Put it in writing. It's your job to give them notice within 30 days why you're keeping money or why you're giving them a refund of their security deposit. If you do not give them that in 30 days, your landlord's security deposit gets doubled. In Hamilton County, it's double payment, double default for the landlord if they're not good about responding to that. Now, if you're a landlord and you don't have a forwarding address, you can't find a tenant, you're not held responsible for that. So, but I learned to make sure I got the forwarding address in writing from my tenants before I have them give me a key. So I know, because I had to fight that one time. So again, good policy, make them put their forwarding address in writing so you can return that security deposit in 30 days. The move-in, move-out checklist that you do with the tenant when they move in. That's the same document that you bring when they move out. You write damages right on that document. That's enough of a document to substantiate why you're holding money. You don't have to write a whole letter and say, we're doing this, we're doing that. You can just put prices on that move-in, move-out checklist for the damages. You can give them back that form, and you can say, these are the damages, this is why I'm withholding money. That's enough in writing to do what we want done, and it works very well. All right, have a good evening. Got you out 15 minutes early.